Perfect. So thank again, everyone, for joining. We're going to get kicked off here on our Getting Started with 51 Teams workshop. We're going to have a bunch of content that we're explaining the high-level features that you get with 51 Teams, as well as explaining some of the key differences with the open source. These kind of workshops work the best when they're interactive. So if you have any questions along the way, you need me to repeat something or clarify, or just want to dive a little bit deeper into a specific workflow or topic, be sure to drop any questions in the Q&A. Jimmy and Harpreet will be helping me out, providing links in the chat as we go along to any key resources, as well as helping manage some of these questions that you might be having. So feel free to drop them along the way. I love being interrupted. Definitely take breaks to answer questions as we go along here. But without further ado, we can hop into it. So I will be the one presenting today. My name's Dan. I'm part of the DevRel team at Voxel 51. I've dropped my LinkedIn in the channel or the chat if you guys are interested in connecting, always posting content about Teams and 51 in general, or even the broader computer vision. So maybe you're familiar with this, but the villain of ML today is bad data, right? How can we overcome these issues of things like model biases, poor quality data, poorly annotated data, which are today leading to actual real-world problems, right? Now we're talking about self-driving cars, and there's actual lethal physical danger present whenever you're building these models. That we need to fix this problem. We need to make sure that our data is of the highest quality possible. That way our model is always going to be at the highest performance, and we don't worry about things like bias issues or self-driving car, lethal physical danger, all these potential issues now that these models are getting deployed. How can we lower this? However, when you go to build a better data set and try to find all these mistakes, it can feel like a daunting task. Keep on pushing and pushing on it, but you're just spending all your time wrangling this data together. Well, that's where 51 comes in to help make this feel like a weightless project for you. You can, the days of worrying about data wrangling or processing, cleaning, all these things are days of the past. And 51 is here to help accelerate your workflows. That way you're spending your time doing real AI work. So we'll be going over a bunch of things, but if you haven't seen 51 before, or you want some teasers of what the awesome things it can do, well, what can we do? We can load all of our data in and actually search based on text, right? You can actually type in things like cats, animals, cars, traffic lights to find exactly the sample you're looking for in your data set. More than that, we can actually even manage our access now, as we're in 51 Teams, of inviting people to collaborate on our projects with us, inviting people to work on our data sets, add their own models, and see the results that they do as we go along with our projects. With Teams, you can also do dataset versioning, where anytime you need to roll back your dataset to a previous version, we can always go back, name that snapshot, and keep it there for posterity. That way, if anything ever happens to our dataset or the quality is degraded, we can always roll back to a previous version. So what are we going to be covering today? We're going to be doing some light housekeeping. We're going to have a broad overview of what 51 is, not just in the open source, but as well as in Teams. And then we'll look at some of the key workflows and features of 51 Teams, namely the collaboration, how we can explore large amounts of data, and what orchestration with Teams looks like in your ML workplaces. At the end, we'll do a guided example of what an ML team might be using Teams as and how it accelerates their processes. So we're going to start with what is 51? So 51's vision is to bring transparency and clarity to the world's data. What we see today more than ever is that these projects in the ML world, both on language size or image size or any modality that you're working on, is going to be driven based on how high quality your data is. And nothing hinders machine learning systems more than the poor quality data. The secret to getting really good ML products and into production lies in improving your data sets and not your model architectures. Today, we see models change every 2 months, 3 months, depending on what the exact model you're looking at. So there's always going to be improvements on the model architecture side that are most likely not coming from within a house. So if you want to be improving your overall performance in your models, it's really going to be on the data set management side with data-centric AI thinking and not on the model architecture side. Companies are hiring all this ML talent, but they don't have the full tools and workflows in place yet to actually productionize and move these things along fast. Projects can take months, if not years, to get to a model to production. And then even then, there's still troubles that you might face. So today we'll be covering a bunch of things in this workshop, but we're mainly talking about ML terms in visual AI, right? So we're looking for data scientists, data engineers, or anyone that's familiar with these processes. And we're going to be talking about how 51 Teams can upgrade and level up all these existing workflows. We'll only be lightly touching on the 51 open source and how it actually works, as well as the SDK tutorial. If you're interested in learning more of how to use 51 and how to level up your data sets entirely, check out the Getting Started workshop that we have monthly. Or if you want to take it into another level, we have a Getting Started with Plugins workshop, which can teach you another level up, almost like an advanced level course for how to get started with 51. So today we'll be focusing mostly on the enterprise version and how that levels up 51 Teams and ML production as in a general enterprise environment. So like I mentioned before, my name is Dan. I'm on the DevRel team. I'm an ML engineer as well by practice. Voxel 51 is who's providing this today. We're the main developers of 51 Teams. What is a voxel? A voxel is to a pixel, or is to a video what a pixel is to an image. It's that volume element. And what does the 51 stand for? Well, you guys can drop it in the chat. Any good guesses, either Jimmy or Harpreet or myself, we'll let you know. But it's a little bit of a fun inside secret if you've never heard about it before. So when we look at AI today, you're probably familiar with a lot of these tools in this diagram on the right. And we see that every part of the AI pipeline is seemingly siloed in its own little world, right? Whether it's data storage or annotations, models or compute, there isn't a lot of conversation along the way of where this all fits and how they plug into each other. That means your team currently that's developing models has to spend valuable time connecting these resources together, figuring out what is the best stack, as well as trying to figure out a way that everything can work together in harmony. Now with 51 Teams, we allow users to organize, search, and visualize all their data in one place. It stands as a single source of truth where you're going to be able to bring all of your data into one place and then always be able to bounce it out somewhere else if need be. This can all be automated and productionize your workflows. That way, the tricky parts, things like pre-processing or QA, these kind of things that can happen automatically, can happen overnight. That way, when you get to your desk, first thing in the morning, you're spending your time doing ML work and not wrangling all your data together. And the most important thing that I want to emphasize here is that this solution is very flexible, extensible, and scalable. What makes 51 Teams different than other tools that you might see that are out on the market is that we're not going to be marketing to you as this one-all-stop solution for every problem that you have. That's ridiculous to think about, especially with how fast the world of AI is evolving. There is no one-stop shop. There's no one-button click. There's no way that from the very beginning of your pipeline all the way to the end of the pipeline and have great results. But with 51 Teams, you get that flexibility and the extensibility to plug in all of your familiar tools that you're using, whether you're using AWS or Google Cloud or something else. You can bring in the models of your choice, annotation tools of your choice, and you can start or stop this process where you like. And one of the most popular things that we hear is, well, I've already built some of my own in-house tools on the model evaluations front or something like that. Because 51 Teams is built on the open source 51, all that code is there for you to easily plug in your own tools or your tools that you've already purchased from somewhere else, all in one place, so that way you can all work harmoniously. This is not going to be something that is a button click, right? This is something that's going to allow real ML engineers to do real ML work. And so you can really start streamlining your workflows here. You can extend any of the workflows that we're doing with plugins and data apps. So if you're always looking to add a little bit more insight, add a little bit of your own custom code or anything like this, it's all possible within 51. You can make every button you do, every grid you touch, all customized to exactly how you like it. So that way your team is doing ML work in the way that they prefer. We can support local data, remote data, and cloud data. All is very possible. And we can integrate with whatever annotation tool that you're using today. If you're using tools like CVAT, Label Studio, V7, or maybe you're outsourcing it to a different provider, all this can get plugged in instantly into 51 so that when those annotation jobs are finished, they're instantly loaded into your 51 Teams environment. That way you can get right to work. We can integrate with model training, things like PyTorch, TensorFlow, popular libraries like Ultralytics are all integrated into 51 today, as well as experiment tracking tools like MLflow and weights and biases, where you can actually model your experiments as you go through and track your progress as your models get better over time. 51 also supports all the popular visual AI tasks, whether it's your normal classic examples like classification, detection, segmentation, or even more advanced use cases like polylines, key points, 3D, meshes, AV data. All of it is possible in 51. If it's something that you can see, it most likely fits right into 51 with no problems. Especially if you're bringing different data set types, maybe Cocoa data sets, Yellow data sets, these data are in all different formats from where it's coming from. Well, in 51, it's all going to be in a single source of truth. It's all going to be all agreeable. So if you're bringing in data sets from different types or different sources, they will all be in a single format once they're in 51. And then when it comes time to export to a different format, 51 allows you to export to 29 different types of data sets so you can meet the needs that you have. So one of the biggest questions that I get, right, is what is the difference between 51 open source and 51 teams? Well, in the 51 open source, you'll be able to do curating your data sets, evaluating your models, finding mistakes, visualizing embeddings. All the ML tooling is there, right? But what you're not going to get is that is all made for a single seat. Eventually, what happens is your computer vision engineers who maybe have tried 51 in the past and have said good things about it are going to eventually start to hit non-computer vision engineer problems, right? These are things like storing your data into a cloud bucket and connecting to it to 51, multi-user collaboration, enterprise level security. In this world where AI privacy and security concerns are higher than ever, things like dataset versioning to prevent catastrophic data loss, as well as the ML automation and the enterprise level support that us at Voxel 51 are going to provide to you, right? So is at 51 teams everything else you can imagine. We've solved so many problems that are not computer vision related, right? This is why this is what we build our heart on. This is why a lot of our team is not actual ML engineers. We put all of our resources into things like scaling cloud data for you, making performance as fast as possible, making sure that data works, making sure that user collaboration as good as possible. That way your ML engineers are spending their time doing ML work. They should not be spending their time routing to the cloud or doing things like that. 51 teams takes all those worries away from you and gives you even more on top of that, all bundled in with enterprise level support that you just can't beat. And so what is the work that we're seeing people today and our customers do? Well, they're centralizing their data. They're bringing it into all one place. That way, if they need to make new data sets, if they need to splinter off from the data lake, if they have a million or billion samples, they can load them all in and then start doing work with them instantly. This is perfect for things like training data selection or annotation process management, where you can QA these processes as you're going through your ML workflow to make sure only the best data is going into your models, as well as model evaluation and selection. How do you know that it's time to, you have a model A and a model B? How do you know which one is the best one to be deployed? How do you know when it's time to update your models? And how do you know that your models aren't going to drift over time and their performance reduce in actual real world environments? This allows for model and dataset co-development, where as you build your models, you're also improving your data sets. And by improving your data sets, you're going to get better models, right? This forms a circular motion here that just at the end gives even better production grade applications, as well as synthetic data curation. This is very popular with things like Gen AI, as we're going to be doing things like in-painting, synthetic data generation using tools like DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, or more. How can we actually make sure that this new synthetic data is matching the existing real-world data? This is all possible in 51, and we have real customers doing this today. We also see that data curation is just not an option, and we hear this from every single person who uses 51 Teams. It is just no longer possible to download a zip file of data on your computer and then just blindly train a model on it, right? There's too many concerns for things like bias, model drift over time. Your data could be full of outliers or volatile data that's going to train your model towards crazy outcomes that you can't predict, especially over large amounts of classes or very large models. On top of this, we just don't know if there's going to be annotation mistakes within there, right? Who knows if the dog's labeled cat, if we have multiple bounding boxes on a single object. With 51, we can clean all these up very easily. And then very lastly, We never know if there's a bad actor in there. Has anyone poisoned our data set? Are there samples in there that should not be in there, right? That someone has snuck in for nefarious reasons? These are all things that can be found very quickly using the built-in 51 Teams tools. And so the solution is to just put center at your data stack, right? We see this across many Fortune 10 companies that we're working with today, that they're investing their time, they're investing their money into building out the data portion of their stack. That way they can faster push out models, right? We see 30% of all model errors by independent studies are just due to poor data, right? In fact, 65% of the time that ML teams are wasting is just wrangling their data together, right? Just getting that data into a form where their model can start training on it and inferring on it. That's 2/3 of their time. So with the right AI stack, you're going to get to production faster. If you don't have the right stack, we see 85% of ML projects just don't get into production, right? Either the model fails, the data never worked, or the project just falls off because they're not meeting the requirements in the time that's needed. And so 51 is going to put the power into your hands, where you're going to be able to have a flexible interface, customize any portion of this, track from all the way from the pre-annotation stage all the way into the model deployment stage, but start and stop this journey however you like. Completely customizable to allow you to find hidden structures in your data sets, evaluate your models, all in one platform where you can build the highest quality data sets and models for your computer vision platforms. We can even import very complex data sets. As you see, we have new scenes data here for AV data, where you can load in multiple different camera shots, videos, 3D meshes. We have supports for synthetic AV data now, just more and more data sets that we're constantly improving our support for to give you the best possibility to push your models to the highest performance. So I'm going to do some brief questions and then double check that we have no questions. But very briefly over the basics of 51. If you're not familiar, or maybe you just need a refresher, 51 is built off data sets, right? Our data set is our all-encompassing object that's going to hold all of our samples. These samples could be images, they could be videos, they could be 3D point clouds, whatever you define, right? But the data set is the overall encompassing object that holds all your samples in one place. The samples are the atomic elements that live inside the data set. So this could be an image, a video, or a point cloud, for instance. Other forms as well, but I won't get too deep into that. But the samples are the atomic elements that live inside the data set. Inside these samples, you're going to be giving information that you can store on each sample that are fields. Fields are things like your annotations, your model predictions. They could be metadata like, was it raining that day? What day was this picture taken? Who took the picture? Anything like this. Has it been processed, not processed, right? So you can store as many fields as you'd like on any of your samples, as many model predictions as you like, as many different types of model predictions. So we see a hierarchy of data sets that hold all of our samples, samples that hold all the information about the image within fields, which are things like annotations, labels, and more. Just to go hammer this home, this is what a full overarching flow would look like. So we can see our data set encompassing our samples and our sample holding things like metadata, predictions, ground truths, tags, and the file path to the sample. So how does this all come together to make a ML workflow that's going to level up your current existing environment? Well, we can find duplicates right away. How do I go through a million images and figure out if any of them are nearly duplicate, right? Maybe you have a picture of a car and then the same car slightly down the same road. Maybe you have multiple people playing tennis, people surfing, giraffes, bears, whatever it might be. You can find these duplicates right away and make sure that you can remove them. That way you're training on new data and not overfitting on duplicates within your data set. We can also explore embeddings to understand the distribution of our data set, find outliers in your data set, and even find mislabeled classifications by using the embeddings field. You can do very basic things overnight that are going to completely revolutionize how much time you spend on wrangling your data together, such as image quality. Instantly find your brightest samples, your darkest samples, your noisiest samples, poor quality samples across the board. That way, whenever you start your day, you can instantly only be looking at data that is high quality and ready to be trained on. You do not want to be training on a completely black image or a completely white image. That way, your model is only training on images that it's actually going to see in its deployed environment. These are all possible due to plugins, a way that you can extend your workflows within FiftyOne. You can code your own plugins. All you have to do is wrap a very thin amount of Python code around your existing Jupyter notebooks or workflows to make this all into this form that you can customize yourself. We even have a plugin that helps you build your own plugins, define your own buttons, forms, all this kind of stuff, all within Python. So you can create these very powerful forms that you're seeing here, all with these buttons, questions, drop downs, all customizable by you, all within Python. We're going to touch a little bit more on plugins in the future, but it's a super powerful system that exists within FiftyOne. Here's all the existing plugins that you can use today. Things like the image quality issue once I mentioned, but even things like leveraging GPT, text-to-image models, valuation, zero-shot prediction if you want to do automatic annotation, concept strip space traversal to find exactly what you're looking for in your data set, OCR, PDF loading, and more, all in one place. So if you're interested in finding out what all the plugins are, we do have the FiftyOne plugins repo that hosts all of our plugins there, as well as the voxel51.com. If you go to our plugins page, you can check them out there as well. Lastly, all this work is to find the highest quality subset within your data. If that one is one that includes no image quality issues, one that includes no duplicates, only the best images that you can train on, well, how do we save these subsets afterwards? Well, we can save them by saving our views up in this top left bar, and then you can actually go ahead and pass those views to your teammates using URLs, using links. That way they can always jump right into the work that you're providing them, whether it's the best data in your data set or the worst data in your data set. It's that easy to jump to it to make sure you know exactly where it is every time. So we're going to do a little pop quiz here, as well as I'm going to double check we have no Q&As or any questions in the chat. But pop quiz, with embeddings in FiftyOne, you can A, pre-label data, B, send annotation jobs, C, find likely annotation mistakes, or D, fine-tune your models. Now we can have multiple answers here, so that's totally fine. So feel free to answer in the chat or answer in your head. I'll give you a couple more seconds. But the answer here is A and C. With embeddings in FiftyOne, you can absolutely pre-label your data based on the clusters in your data set. We can find groups and then pre-label them, such as things like night and day or dog and cat. We can find those pretty easily using embeddings. We can also find likely annotation mistakes the same way. For instance, if you have a cluster full of dogs and there seems to be a single cat in that cluster, well, you can check out that cat image to make sure it's not accidentally mislabeled as a dog, which more often than not, it is. We can't send annotation jobs with embeddings, but you can send annotation jobs with FiftyOne. And we can't use embeddings to fine-tune our models because we're going to be using the entire image, right? Not just the embeddings. So while we can't do B and D with embeddings, that doesn't mean that they can't be done within FiftyOne. I'm going to take a second to check my chat. Seems like we're doing all good. So I'll keep moving along. With embeddings in FiftyOne, you can A, find most similar samples, B, search through images with natural language, C, search through object patches, D, find your most unique samples, and E, find exact duplicates. Well, with embeddings in FiftyOne, you can actually do A through D. That's because with embeddings in FiftyOne, you can find similar samples or search through natural text using our search function. All you need to do is apply an embedding model like clip that has a text natural language component to it. We can also do C and D to search through object patches and find our most unique samples. We can search through object patches the same way we search through our images with natural language, or find similar samples. We can do similar patches as well. And then finally, D for our most unique samples. We can find our most unique samples using embeddings based on the distance of the different embeddings and how far apart they are. We can't find exact duplicates with embeddings because they're going to be the same exact sample. So they're going to have the same exact embedding. So it's a little bit different. But we can find exact duplicates very easily in FiftyOne. So getting into the nice meats and potatoes part of this, what is FiftyOne Teams going to bring to your team and how much better is it going to be after the experience, right? So with FiftyOne Teams, you're getting enterprise-grade software for ML teams. That means multi-user collaboration, a centralized deployment in your environment. And I want to stress this a lot. in your environment, whether you're in AWS, GCP, Azure, on-prem, or something, a combination of some of those. We can meet you wherever you are to get into your environment. That way your stuff never has to touch our servers, right? There's no pictures that need to get uploaded to some type of 51 Teams server or anything like that that's on our side. It can all be completely in your system. This all comes with enterprise-grade security to lock this down and make sure no one's going to get access that who shouldn't be, all tied with user roles and permissions. So even within your own enterprise, you can define who has permissions to do what roles are doing which, and that makes sure no one's going to be able to touch data sets that they shouldn't be looking at. This also comes with dataset versioning, so you can always roll it back. I always use the example of, like, God forbid the intern like blows up the data set and now all your images are black or missing or something like that. We can always re-roll backwards, figure out that dataset versioning, figure out the right one that we need to go back to, and then reload and start again. And this can all be automated as well and connected to your own compute clusters. So if you're training your models, if you're doing pre-processing, you can connect this all within 51 Teams and automate it overnight. As well as all this comes with white glove enterprise support to make sure that you're getting started at the best way possible and that you're taking advantage of every feature you possibly can take advantage of within 51 Teams. We want to make sure that everyone has the best possible experience, and we are very responsive at all times of the day in all of our help channels as well as our customer support channels. So what does a 51 Teams dataset look like, and how do you get to collaborating with it? So a 51 Teams dataset looks very similar to how it does in 51. Datasets can be loaded from the zoo, uploaded from your own computer, or it can be ingested from things like Cocoa data types, Kitty data types, or YOLO data types. Like I mentioned, 51 supports 29 different data formats right now. So once you have that dataset loaded in, the next step would be to share it with your team members. And you can share your team members very easily with these 2 lines of code. All you need to do is do FOS upload media. You will define where that media is going to go, whether it's in your Google bucket or an AWS bucket or something like that. Update your file paths to make sure that now the data is going to permanently live up in the cloud. And once you hit that dataset.persistent, that's now going to make it permanently living up in the cloud so any of your team members can look at it. They can then view it, look at it in a link. You can even send them a link, and they'll be able to view that dataset right away in their team's environment. This all comes with authentication built in for your own team. So this plugs in exactly with your own internal authentication tools, whatever that might be. So that way, if you when you go to log into your 51 Teams environment, it's going to look very familiar to you. Whatever normal authentication protocols that you use, you'll sign in with your same email, same passwords as you normally do internally, and then you'll be able to access all your data sets and your teams in one place. We even have roles and permissioning in 51. So going across the board here, we go from the top to the bottom. We have our admin, and this is, of course, the one above all who can edit any of the data sets, create data sets, delete data sets, as well as grant access to users. They're going to be able to have full control over their 51 Teams environments and be able to do any changes that they'd like to do. The next one would be the member, who's able to have all the agency within their own seat, right? This is someone who is leading their own ML projects, who's creating new data sets, who is performing tasks on those data sets and running plugins, pre-processing their code, and tracking their data within their data sets. They have default access level across all data sets, but they don't have any ability to see or manage other users. They can only really work amongst themselves on creating data sets and inviting other people on those data sets. They lose out on the admin permissions of doing things like removing users, adding user groups, or granting new or lesser permissions across the data sets. The collaborator is another step below that, which is someone who only is allowed access to specific data sets, right? You can imagine having multiple different teams and multiple different projects across your organization. A collaborator would be someone who's only allowed to work on the project that has been assigned to them, and they can even be granted different access depending on what type of collaborator you want them to be. If this is someone that can only view, or some of them can edit these data sets, as well as they're not going to be able to create new data sets or clone existing data sets. They're only going to be working in the projects that were assigned for them. Lastly is our guest role. And the guest role is someone who's granted access to just view the data set. They can't create any new data sets, they can't see the users on the data set, and they can't perform functions on the data set. they're just able to view and understand the process. This is really good for things like high-level decision makers, customers who you can invite in on your deployment. So that way the customer can see how their progress is going on their models or the projects you're working on for them, or more. So there's these four main roles. These four roles can also be customized to your liking, as well as you can create entirely new roles if you like. With roles as well, it's important to mention that we have groups. So if you already have some sort of group or teams built into your internal authentication, for instance, you can imagine having your visual AI team. Well, you can apply roles and permissioning across entire teams or groups of people and not do it on an individual basis as well. This makes it a lot easier to manage teams in your enterprise. That way you can change any permissions across multiple users at once and not have to go through each single one individually. How this looks in the app, well, you click that Manage tab in your team's environment, and then you can click on this orange button for grant access, type in who you want to invite, change the different permissions that they might have, and then once you send that, they'll be able to be invited and see this data set after you join. Likewise, you can also change the permissions that I mentioned. So, Michelle here, unlike Jacob, who can only view, Michelle is getting invited in to now be able to manage and actually change, edit, clone our data set as we like. So how do you work with the data? You can visualize it and run plugins, run any compute or orchestration up in the cloud in the 51 Teams environment, but sometimes you want to pull the data down locally and work with it personally. This might be to train a model or to alter or just test some of the data yourself. So when you pull this data down, all you need to do is call the download media function. This will download the data set directly to your computer locally, where then you can update samples, add new model predictions, or add predictions. And then once you make these changes, you can just upload it back up to make sure the changes are logged to the cloud. This is all going to be tied to dataset versioning. So that way, whenever you're performing, especially as you're working across these large teams, if you're doing things like adding new model predictions, adding new samples in, maybe you have a new type of data pre-processing or augmentation that you're going to be adding to your data set. Before you do these things and after you do these things, you can automatically save with dataset versioning. With dataset versioning, you'll always be able to roll back so that you're never going to lose anything along the way. Because 51 at the core knows that your data is one of the most important parts and most valuable parts of your company. This is why 51 Teams is always safe and secure and comes with the best authentication, permissioning to make sure no one is going to be where they shouldn't be, and all tied with versioning to make sure that 51 Teams is safeguarding the foundation for your innovation. So quick pop quiz here, as well as going to check to make sure we have no questions. It doesn't seem like it right now, but feel free to drop those questions in. I'll be happy to, go into more detail on any of the things I discussed. But with 51 Teams, you can only work with cloud data. Hopefully by now, everyone knows that this is false, that you can work with the data wherever it might be, whether it's locally, if it's in multiple clouds, you can work with it in 51 Teams. So we do have one question. I'm going to take a look at it before we hop into exploring embeddings in the data lake. If a dataset can't exit the servers of an institution, can they still make use of 51 Teams? Or is it required to be uploaded to the cloud and hosted by FiftyOne? In other words, can you still run Voxel 51 Teams locally? This is a great question. And the answer is yes, you can still take use of 51 Teams. We have customers today that are doing on-prem solutions, right? So these on-prem solutions are, whether it's a server that can't leave that internal location, we have 51 Teams running on these servers. So as long as you're in the building or VPNing in or whatever it might be, you can still connect to that server. As well as we have even more rigorous, on-prem solutions that allow for you to still use 51 Teams and collaborate with team members just on that server and not in Google Bucket, right? As I mentioned, 51 Teams doesn't have to work only in the cloud. It doesn't work with only cloud data. This can be data locally on your computer. This could be data locally on a server, or it could be data locally or up on a cloud, right? Either one works, and we have solutions for each one. Eli says, if you'd love to see embeddings in more detail, Eli, you're in luck, because that is our next topic to cover. So we're going to be talking about exploring embeddings in the data lake. And I'm going to have to paint a little bit of a picture here as we're kind of going over a workflow here of one of the most popular ways that people use 51 Teams today. right? And it starts with ingesting data. As a company, as your enterprise, you might be taking in thousands, hundreds of thousands of samples every day, right? And as these new hundreds of thousands of samples come in every day, you're faced with tough tasks. These tough tasks could be things like, I can only select a specific percentage of these to go get annotated. Or how do I know which ones I'm going to pull out to train? And how do I know that the new data coming in still matches the data from a year ago and my data hasn't dripped? These are all very important questions to have answers for in the machine learning world, and FiftyOne Teams helps you answer them. So we're going to start with ingesting data. So how do we actually ingest new data into FiftyOne Teams? This new, the truck's coming. We have 1,000 new samples to load into FiftyOne Teams. How do we load it in? So there's multiple ways. You can add them through the app. Way you can do it, there's a plugin. Just drag and drop your folder, your zip file, whatever it might be. Say what format it is, and you can automatically upload these samples into the app. You can also use your SDK the same way you normally do it with FiftyOne. You can upload these new data through the SDK, hit that upload media button like I showed you before, and it'll be loaded up into your cloud or FiftyOne deployment environment as well. You can also pull data from other data sets. This is very important, as many customers like to have a form of a data lake in their FiftyOne Teams environment, right? This is the single source of truth data set. It has 1 million images of all the classes and all the work we do across our enterprise. When I want to start a new project, I'll pull a subset that I'm interested in from that data lake and create a new data set, right? And this all comes with unlimited custom metadata. As you can see here, you can store the date that the picture was coming from. You can say where it was coming from, the weather of that day, whatever it might be. Save all this metadata onto your sample. The more the merrier, because you can always come back and slice, filter, and sort through our data sets to find exactly the data that we're looking for. And so now we have this new data coming in, as I've been mentioning. You can see here, I have these cats that are coming in. I have a couple of 5 new images that have been coming in. And I just want to make sure that when they load in, does it look like the rest of my data set? Are there outliers that I should be checking out? Are there any questions that need to be addressed on this new data set? Or how do I choose which of this new data that I want to go get annotated? Because I can only choose one image or 20% of my data that's coming in to go get annotated, right? I can't afford to do the rest, either for time or resource reasons. Well, the first thing that we want to do is, if we have millions of images, we're going to hit a problem, right? This is maybe something you're familiar with if you've used the open source FiftyOne tool, is that your computer, whether it's a MacBook or something like that, can't easily render millions of images, right? It can't hold this kind of idea of millions of images. So FiftyOne Teams fixes this problem using lightning mode and many other optimizations that you don't have advantage of in FiftyOne. This is all in the back end, all why our great engineers spend so much of their time to make this as lightning fast as possible, including our lightning mode, right? And lightning mode is basically a mode set for only Teams that allows for high performance curation by indexing your fields. This means that if you have millions of images and you want to find every cat in those millions of images, you'll be able to instantly find those cats without having to wait for a long query or search function, essentially. It's very easy to get started. All you need to do is call dataset.createIndex, and then you'll be able to take advantage of lightning mode. When the new data comes in, we've loaded it in. Now the first step is to visualize it, right? And so we can actually visualize our data based off our tags. We can see how it's distributed across the rest of our data. So you can see we have these green and orange points from our 2 new batches of data that have come in. I can select both the green and orange points as well as the points around these green and orange points to understand what does the data look like, where is it formed, and what are the most similar data points to them. So you can see here, when I turn my data back on, I'm going to go grab this cluster so I can see not only my new data, but as well as the data that's similar to my new data from previous versions. This is important because we want to understand data drift, right? The model or the diagram on our left here demonstrates what data drift is. And data drift is basically the data coming in is no longer representative of the data from previous, right? This could be things like the landscape has changed, the weather has changed. You can imagine if you took all of the first set of training data all in the summer, and now it's the winter and snow has fallen, the skies are a little darker, people are wearing jackets on the street. That data doesn't look like the summer anymore, so our data is going to begin to drift in a different direction. So there's ways that we can do this. We can basically either look at our embeddings to understand our data drift, or we can apply models from previous versions. So we have a model from the summer, let's run it on the winter data to see how well it performs. If the winter data begins to drop off and the confidence isn't as good as it previously was, which we can detect automatically with 51, then we can confidently say that our data has drifted away from our previous model, or our previous data set at least. One of the best ways to do this is with our model comparison plugin, right? So as you are bringing in these new data sets and bringing in new data, how can we know that model is drifted? Well, we can compare our model from 2 months ago to our model from a month ago, right? Or even the model of today. And we can see exactly the examples right up and close, find those edge cases across millions of detections, hundreds of thousands of images of exactly where model A is doing better than model B, exactly where model B is doing better than model A. This way, deployments of new models aren't based off single source numbers, right? We're not basing off new deployed models off my accuracy went up 2%, so I should deploy this new model. Well, your accuracy might have went up 2% because you're now getting every single stop sign or person in the data set. But if you've drastically dropped off in a different category, something like pedestrians, right, crossing the street, you obviously shouldn't be deploying this model, right? And this is a common thing I see across all of visual AI today. People only focusing on one number results, right? My model is highly accurate, so it's better than my previous one. This is a little bit of too much of a blanket statement. Where we want to really get into the nitty gritty, I diagnosed our edge cases, whether this is things like our smallest bounding boxes, largest bounding boxes, our dark samples, or just like as I mentioned here, comparing one model to another to be confident that when we go to deploy new models, that we're always deploying the best model. And that's the best model for our problem, not necessarily the model that just has the single highest accuracy. So how do we make sure we get to that process, right? Well, this kind of starts, as I mentioned, as we bring in this new data, we see how similar it is to our other data, make sure we have no outliers there, make sure that our data is not drifting somewhere else, right? Based on, adding new detections and to comparing them to previous models. But this also means QAing annotations. So using this example here, we're going to be looking at the BDD data set. And in the BDD data set, I've run in my embeddings on my model, and we can see these two large clusters. There's a cluster on the left and a cluster on the right. And these clusters are basically my model telling me that nothing is more prevalent in our data set other than whether or not it's daytime or it's nighttime. But I'm very quickly able to see, because my data set is annotated, that some of these annotations are incorrect, right? So when I turn off the daytime sign and I only turn on nighttime samples, I can quickly grab some nighttime samples and find that some of these samples labeled night are actually day, as we just saw. Likewise, I can flip back over to daytime only and select the daytime samples on the nighttime side and very quickly find that some of the daytime labeled samples are actually nighttime. We have customers all across the board using this type of QAing in all of their stacks to make sure that the data that they just sent off to get annotated is coming back high quality. This is great to make sure that your models are training on the highest quality samples, that way you're only training on them to get the best performance. It's also a great way to QA not just your annotations, but your annotators to make sure that the job they're doing as well, to make sure that they haven't dropped their quality over time, especially if you're using human annotators. How do you make sure that they're doing the work that they're supposed to, that you're getting the best bang for your buck? 51 embeddings is absolutely one of the best ways to do this, as you can track these annotations both at the sample level as well as the patch level. And it's all about finding the right data for the right problem, right? We can use these embeddings to create views, explore, and run our own custom plugins on this. So that way, if I need to train a model only on a specific subset of my data, I can find that exact cluster with embeddings that I'm interested in training on, as well as I can use these embeddings to find my outliers. Where are my samples that are the furthest away from the rest of my data, and develop custom test cases. So that way my models, whenever I go to deploy, I'm always checking those custom test cases, right? I always want to go back and check to see, like, how does my car drive in hail, right? We have barely any hail pictures, but I'm always interested to understand how my model trains in the hail, right? Or it could be a factory line where there's just one camera that's a little bit different, but that camera is very important. I need to make sure that my model's always training well on that one angle. Using embeddings will be very easy to find these kind of test cases, these edge cases in your own data, using the visualization and the exploration. All this comes with one of our many, many integrations that you can tie into any of this process. So when you're exploring your data, you just load it into the data lake and you're starting to take your next steps. You're going to be able to train models like YOLO from Ultralytics. You'll be able to take advantage of your own vector databases, as we have like 9 different vector database integrations, whether it's a MongoDB, Redis, Pinecone, Quadrant, Milvus, or more. Be able to very quickly find exactly those samples that you're looking for, as well as plug into all the different annotation tools you may be using, as well as wherever your data might be living. All this can happen in one place in FiftyOne Teams, where you can plug in with all your favorite ML tools and get your single source of truth, be it FiftyOne. So I'm going to take another break here to make sure that we have no questions. I think there was some questions asked, but I have been cleared out for us.
One of the questions, Dan, was about working with videos. So if you want to just do a quick riff on video support, that might be helpful.
Great question. So FiftyOne can absolutely work with videos, right? Images, videos, 3D is our wheelhouse. And with FiftyOne videos, you can actually work at both the video level, which is going to be our sample level in this case, but you can also work at the frame level, right? So maybe your whole video is a classification of a car driving or turning left, for instance. You're going to be able to add those kind of labels, those classification labels on your sample, but you're also going to be able to store frame level detections as well, or frame level segmentations even, to understand exactly where each detection is. You can do tracking over these detections. It's all very powerful within FiftyOne. FiftyOne, this is a little history fact for everyone on the call here, was actually built to work with videos first instead of images. So we think about it very carefully, and it's a problem that we have approached very thoughtfully. So FiftyOne can absolutely work with videos, and the support is fantastic. We have one more. What if I want to use images and videos as input? Can we do that? Great question. The answer, once again, is absolutely. We have this notion of something called a grouped data set. And a grouped data set is just all the goodness of all the other data sets in one blob, right? So if I want to have images in my data set, videos in my data set, and maybe 3D point clouds in my data set, for instance, many self-driving car data sets are grouped data sets. We're going to have multiple camera feeds, video feeds coming in. There's going to be a LiDAR point cloud scan of the surrounding area. So with FiftyOne grouped data sets, you can hold all this in one spot. That way you can always work with it the way that makes the most sense for you, not maybe the way that you've previously had to work with it in separate blocks. Sounds like we're all cleared out on the QA for right now. So we're going to continue forward on orchestrating our workflows. I meant to say as an encoder. Yeah, I mean, like if you can store the data you're training your encoders on, if it's images and videos, it'll definitely work in FiftyOne. How you train your encoders is up to you. We do have some blogs on it, I think, actually coming out soon from Jacob. But yes, you can work with it for sure. So moving into orchestrating our workflows. If you're familiar with plugins, maybe this is something that is familiar to you. If not, plugins are the extensible part of FiftyOne that I talked about before, where you can execute these custom workflows in the app using FiftyOne and a small amount of Python code around your existing Jupyter notebooks or whatever it might be, Python code. The best part of this for FiftyOne Teams is this notion of delegated operators. And what is a delegated operator? It's basically a plugin or operator within a plugin that can run in the background, right? You're going to delegate this off to a different service. With delegated operators, you can actually hook up your own orchestrators and view its progress in the app and manage errors. This can be things like Apache Airflow or other ones that you use. But as you can see on this panel on the left here, we can actually see all the different functions that someone has been trying to run on our data set, whether it's different team members running different functions. So we have things like applying outlier detections, computing aspect ratio of our images, and more. And we can see exactly which ones completed positively and which ones failed negatively. So what does this mean? It's kind of like putting on the guardrails, right? So the story I like to tell about explaining how this works in FiftyOne Teams is, imagine you have a rock star engineer who has been putting out just really great code for you guys recently. In fact, he just devised a very good pre-processing script that's going to load in all your data, and it's going to do this awesome pre-processing workflow on it. And then when the data comes out, it's perfectly ready to be visualized and trained and work with. However, this is a long process that takes, long amounts of time, and your engineer just spent a long amount of time learning it and developing it. Now, this rockstar engineer, it wouldn't make sense for him to own this pre-processing function for the rest of time, right? You want your rockstar to go make another rockstar project, right? Push him on to the next great thing that he can build. So with 51 plugins, this is kind of what the best looking handoff can look like for these kind of projects. If you have a really great pre-processing workflow that you developed or your rockstar engineer has developed, he can create a 51 plugin that's going to define the inputs into the pre-processing. It's going to give notices about how to use it, how to run it, where it can error out, what the proper acceptable inputs are. That way, whenever you pass this off to a more junior engineer or someone who's learning the workflow, it's much easier. You put the guardrails on them. They can't accidentally screw up. They can't run the code out of order. And all the error checking messages is much more human-like. Of course, this can all be monitored within 51 Teams as well, where if you head over to that runs tab, you can see the exact progress, what has been queued up, what processes are running right now, and if there is an error, you can view the errors to understand exactly what is happening. So this rockstar engineer no longer owns this process, but he can still overview the process, manage any errors that come up, and see how everyone else is running his code. This only takes a light amount of Python code to wrap around your existing awesome workflows that I mentioned, and then you can be orchestrating and viewing these all in a managed environment. As a manager, you can see all the work that your different ML engineers are working on the data set, whether it's training new models, finding mistakes, evaluating their models, as well as things like orchestrate these things overnight. So that way, whenever you show up in the morning, your work is all ready to be done and it's ready to do ML work. You're not spending the day running pre-processing code, you're not waiting for things. All this stuff can happen overnight for these long processes. So when you wake up in the morning, real work right away. So a way to look at this is if we go into our runs tab here, we can click on any of this. We can see the inputs that were provided, as well as we can check out any errors if there was an error. So for instance, when I scroll down here, I can see that I just didn't have a library installed, and I can very quickly just, pass over to the admin, hey, I need to install this library on our server or our orchestrator in order to properly run my project. How can we get started with orchestration? Well, once the orchestrator is deployed by your system admin, you can delegate any of the operators by checking the delegated execution box. You can queue as many of the plugins as you like across all of your different data sets. So every plugin in 51, for the most part, will feature this little checkbox that says, hey, would you like to delegate this execution? If you click yes, then it will automatically run this execution on your orchestrator and queue it up amongst all the other queued up operators at the time. While it's running, you can see exactly how it's going. You can see that this one is queued by me, Daniel Gural. I queued it up a minute ago, as well as you can see the past ones, the inputs that were passed into it, and how it was did. This is awesome if you've been monitoring or you're working with other workers. If, my coworker, Abby, has a great model evaluation script, I can see exactly how she inputted and how to replicate it. So that way experiments are much faster for me to replicate, and I'm not spending time passing over inputs or anything like that. The same kind of practices that you often see in things like model experiment tracking to help replicate experiments, you can see the same kind of practices here in 51 plugins. All of this is backed by dataset versioning. So gosh, you accidentally run a plugin that you put in the wrong inputs, and now all your data is really messed up, right? This is like the worst case scenario. You slid the slider too far, you misclicked. It was supposed to be 10, you put in 100. Well, with dataset versioning, you can always roll back. You don't have to stress. You don't have to worry about accidentally wasting all this time. All these problems can be easily fixed by just rolling back to the previous dataset version. This allows you to optimize all your workflows, streamline them, and you never even have to leave the app. If you have people who are QAing your data or working on your data sets, they can do all their work within the app if they like, all by just creating these custom plugins that streamline your workflows. You can even make your own custom onboarding paths, right? So if you are creating new plugins or new systems and you have a new employee coming on, You can create a plugin that just focuses on onboarding people to understand how your workflows work, explaining the data sets that you're working with, explain the models that you're working with. That way, instead of having an engineer sit down with them for 30 minutes, you can basically set up a plugin that walks through your data sets for you and explains all these processes. This is a much easier way to onboard people and explain 51 Teams and the data sets you're working with than manually having to sit down next to someone and spend the time to do it. The best part too is if you ever get confused, even as a pro, I've been working at 51 and using 51 for almost 2 years now. Working at 51 for a year, been using 51 for 2 to 3 years at this point. I still need refreshers. I still check up on docs, and there's still tutorials that I look at. So you can always come back to these onboarding, these educational plugins that you build for your team. That way you're always getting the most out of everything that you do. So we're going to have another pop quiz here, a quick one. With plugins in 51, you can A, create custom operators, B, create custom JavaScript panels, C, add custom Python code into the app, and D, create custom Python panels. The correct answer is all of these, which is the best part. You're able to create all these custom operators, which is going to be wrapping your Python code in the 51 plugin code. You can create your own custom JavaScript plugins. What this means is if you want to embed your own tools that you've built in-house, these own visualizers, maybe it's other tools that you've been using, if they're hosted online, things like weights and biases, MLflow, for instance, work this way, where you can actually embed them inside of 51. That way you never have to leave. You can also add custom Python code into the app, as well as build your own custom Python panels. So that way, if you don't have any experienced JavaScript people, you don't need to be a JavaScript expert to make cool UI. We built it so you can do it all in Python and have all that flexibility that you need without ever having to touch JavaScript at all. And so lastly, we're going to go through a guided example here. I'm going to stop at the end for Q&A to make sure that all the questions are answered. I may even give another example or two. But we're going to go through a guided example of how a 51 Teams project looks like. So it's going to start by creating your own Conda environment. This is how you can get started. It's very easy to get started with Teams. Just boot up a custom Conda environment or virtual environment if that's what you prefer to use. You're going to pip install the Teams version of 51. You can do so by copying that line there, as well as defining your environment variables. Now, all this information that I'm showing you is also shared within the 51 Teams app. So whenever you go to your 51 Teams deployment, which is in your URL, just open up your browser, type in whatever your 51 Teams deployment is, go there. All these instructions are going to be located there as well, so you can always remember them. But all it takes is installing the latest version, export some environment variables, which is going to be where your environment is located, as well as your API key that has been given to you as the user. Once you have that API key, you can upload it. If you don't have your API key, just head over to your settings, API keys on your browser here, and you're going to be able to generate a new one. As I mentioned, all those steps are given to you right there. So if you do forget any of these steps along the way, you're very easily able to find them. Lastly, I'll go very quickly through this part of how you can connect with each individual dataset storage unit, whether it's AWS or Google Cloud. With AWS, it's very easy. Just define a file on your system with your credentials in it. This will permanently register your media cache config. That way you can always access that bucket. Likewise, with Google Cloud, all you need to do is provide the service account credentials, again, in a file in your 51 cache. From there, you can register your GCP credentials and just add the key, and then you'll be able to access those buckets once again to upload or download data from. For Microsoft Azure and MinIO, it's very similar. Once again, in the 51 cache, just define your credentials and the location of your buckets. You can also do Azure credentials on a per session basis. Likewise, MinIO is the same way, where you can permanently register them in your cache, or you can do it on a per session basis. And so when it's time to create your data sets, how can you create your data sets? Well, you can import your data through the app, as I'm showing you here. We can click media and labels, select the data type that you're going to be importing. You can be importing any of these different types of data sets, such as Cocoa. Tell which one you want to be uploading it in as a ground truth or a prediction, and then just select a directory on your computer where that data is located, and it will automatically ingest into your data set as a new data set. Or you can upload it to your existing data set to bolster it up. The two ways that we can do this, right? We can do it on the left in the SDK. If you want to do it in code, you can do the data set from directory. Just tell us where your data set is located on your computer, what type of data set it is, and the name you want to call it, and this will automatically create a new data set for you. Or you can load an existing data set from the model zoo, or the 51 dataset zoo, I mean, for things like MS Coco, Open Images, and other popular data sets that are automatically partnered with 51 to provide you with easy use of using these data sets. Once it's time to share teams with your team members, you can very quickly upload it to your cloud by using the upload media function. This is if you're working with local data that you're now ready to share with your team members and push so that you can collaborate on it. Upload that media using the upload media function. Set that data set as persistent to make sure that it's going to be permanently up in your cloud. And this will unlock the collaboration with your team right away, just with these two lines of code. Once your data set is up on the cloud, you can explore your data set online, jump into individual samples, explore annotations, find mistakes, and QA your data however you like. This is all possible using links all in your browser, just a simple login using your credentials from your internal organization, and you're going to get access to all the data sets that you have access to. Once it comes time to run plugins, you can very easily type into the plugins bar or the operators bar which one you want to do. For instance, I want to apply a model here. Click and it will queue it up in your orchestrator if you have it orchestrated, or run it currently if it is going to run right away. Once you have multiple models in, you've curated your data, you've trained your models, you know that your data set is the best quality subset data set that your models can train on. You trained your models on them, and now you have two competing models. Maybe it's a YOLO model and a detection transformer. You want to see which one is the best? We'll compare your models. Use our model evaluation plugin to find the best and worst case scenarios for each of these samples. You can also devise custom test cases where you can find the largest samples, the lowest samples, outliers in your data set, and more to see exactly how your models are performing on both of these. That way, you're always selecting the best model to go into deployment and not selecting 4 models to go into deployment. You can QA your data and find outliers, mistakes in your data set, as well as find duplicates to make sure that the data you're training on is always going to be the highest quality. With data-centric AI, we always think about this in a circular motion, right? It's about bringing your data set in, QAing your annotations, training a model on it, and using your trained model to find even more mistakes within your data set. By using this circular approach, you'll be able to get your models to higher performance in faster time than you would if you focused on an all-in-one-go selection of trying to train your models to the highest performance without iterating in this loop. As I've mentioned multiple times already, roll back whenever you need, right? 51 Teams at its core is a stress-free environment, right? We're solving the problems for you in computer vision that you don't want to be spending your time in, right? You have this great computer vision, this great ML engineering team at your enterprise. We will solve all the problems for things like dataset management, dataset security, as well as rolling it back whenever it needs to be. So that way, if anything happens to your dataset, it's always going to be in tip-top shape. So I'm going to stop here to answer any questions. I have a fun example I could show as well on top of this if you're interested. But for next steps, try Teams. Ask your system admin on how you can get access today if it's already deployed in you, or reach out to sales for a demo. I'll be happy to give proof of concepts as well as teach everyone what 51 Teams is about, figure out how it's best for your organization. As well, if you like what you're hearing, if you want to learn more about 51, hop into our community Slack, or join us on, or check us out on GitHub and drop a star. It'd be greatly appreciated. I'm gonna take a break here. If there's any more questions, drop them into the Q&A or into the chat, as well as happy to stick on to answer any other questions that you might have. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the 51 Teams workshop. I'm very excited about what updates we're going to have soon for Teams. So if you want to take a better look at what 51 Teams is about, you can check over at try.51.ai. We're going to have a lot of new Teams features that are featured here. For instance, we have these new custom panels, as well as our Voxel GPT plugin. So try.51 is a mini Teams environment. But you can see here this panel is a panel that was coded completely in Python, right? So you're building in your own onboarding experiences, educational experiences, custom plots, custom operators, embedding YouTube videos, whatever you like to do. This panel is going to be featured in the next version of Teams in the coming weeks. which is really going to unlock a lot of new cool functionality for our users. And I'm really excited for everyone to get their hands on it. So everything I'm showing you here on the right is all in Python. There's no JavaScript running here. And when I click on any of these buttons, I can instantly find things like finding approximate duplicates in my data sets or generating embeddings, whatever it is. You never have to leave the app, and it can all be in one place with links to the documentation if you need more information. It's super exciting. I can't wait to share it. Like I said, it's going to be coming out in a few weeks. So if you're interested in getting that POC out soon, interested in trying Teams, you're coming in at a great time. So, like I said, I'll stick on for several more minutes to answer any questions. I will drop my LinkedIn again in the chat to make sure that everyone has the resources. Maybe if you think of a question later on, you can ask it. Feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to answer.